Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming to the second edition of Understanding Bitcoin. Quick, very brief history of the event. It was an idea of mine to help people in the Bitcoin space to learn how to properly use Bitcoin. And there weren't any events about Bitcoin. It was mostly events that were agnostic across all cryptocurrencies, even pretty much from the beginning. There were a couple of events that focused on Bitcoin. We have Baltic Honey Badger, and there were several technical events that focused on Bitcoin, which were scaling Bitcoin and then building and breaking Bitcoin. But I felt they were too technical. So I was talking to Adam Back in an event in either Chile or Argentina, one of the LaBitConf. And the idea was, how do we try to explain the technical side of Bitcoin to the average person and help them use it properly? Today there's an awesome YouTube channel that helps you with this, or Sessions. He walked away. So the BTC Sessions YouTube channel, if you don't follow it, please do. Check that out. He's going to be doing lots of tutorials here. And it's going to be awesome. I'm not going to waste any more time. There is coffee in the front. Shout out to Embly for being our coffee sponsor. We have our own little cups with Embly and the Understanding Bitcoin logo. And that's pretty much it. I'll come out for the announcements. There is the carnivory dinner tonight. It's reserved for about 30 people, which is pretty much how many, this is the registrations, plus the speakers. So I'll give you information on that. It's going to take place at a restaurant called Zor. I didn't want to make it public for everyone earlier on the website. So we'll give you more info on that. That's going to start around 8 o'clock tonight. And we're also going to be speaking on a panel at the main conference. Following this ends at 6. And then from 6 to about 6:45, me, Giacomo, Alex Petrov, and probably Sessions will speak on a panel over on the other side. All right, so any further ado, I'm going to bring up Stefano Vera up to the stage.
My name is Lex, aka Bitcoin Mechanic. I work for Start9, and I also like to be as toxic as possible online, but I'm not doing a great job of it at the moment. That's pretty much it for me. I'm Bitcoin lover in Africa.
Greetings. I'm Marco, hero on Twitter. Basically, I'm head of products at Bullrun and also contributor of TDEX, which is basically Tommy Swap, decentralized exchange on Liquid Network.
Excellent. So, just so I can get a sense of the people in the room, so we're targeting to the right level. So, if out of beginner, intermediate, and advanced, can I just get a quick show of hands? Who would say they're a beginner in terms of Bitcoin and learning about self-custody? Who's a beginner?
Don't be shy.
Yeah. Okay. And who's at an intermediate level? Okay. And who would consider themselves advanced? Okay, gotcha. Okay, so just I guess we'll try to keep things accessible for everybody. So to start with, let's just get a quick point of view from you guys on why should we learn to self-custody our Bitcoin? Why is that important?
Yeah, I would use this. So the point is classical, be your own bank, but actually it's more about being resilient in respect to changes in the political and regulatory landscape, because as of now it's actually easy and maybe even tempting for most people to just use a counterparty, a trusted third party, because nothing bad happens right now to you if you do that. The problem is thinking long term and thinking about the fact that Bitcoin was created in order to protect your wealth, even in the event that your wealth is illegal, or protecting your wealth is illegal, or accessing to your wealth becomes illegal. So there is a point about security holes, third parties being a security holes in respect to scammers or hackers or thieves or internal procedure failures, but that's not the, I would say that's not the main threat model, because you can just say, okay, these are good guys, they have good security practices, they're not going to scam me because they have a reputation. The real point is that if your threat model is accessing my wealth and protecting my wealth will never become illegal, will never be under attack, then you probably don't need Bitcoin. If you really want to be exposed to Bitcoin volatility, just buy a Bitcoin future or whatever, just call your bank by phone, and when you ask to invest in oil and tech companies and Forex, you also throw some Bitcoin in and you're fine because you're exposed to the volatility. If you think there is not going to be any scenario in which your wealth is directly attacked by powerful adversaries, if you think that scenario is likely or even just possible, then you have to work before it happens to learn how to manage your wealth individually without trusting any third party. So it's mostly a problem of thinking now about a scenario that can happen in the future. It's already like that in many parts of the world. Like if you have wealth in Venezuela or if you have wealth somewhere else, you already have to really think about your privacy and your security seriously. And you have to be your own bank because the banks will not help you. But even if you are elsewhere, you have to start before taking responsibility for your wealth before the political scenario changes. So I would say it's a matter of time preference and be prepared for the future, which is also the future, coincidentally, where the price of Bitcoin goes up. So if the political landscape never changes, and it's always easy to use your bank account without any kind of censorship, then Bitcoin is kind of useless, so it's not going to really skyrocket in price. If you think Bitcoin is going up, then you can just buy a future, but then again, it's probably going up because the banking, the normal wealth management system is collapsing under political censorship. So they are connected scenarios.
Actually, we might just jump straight to the next question because I think that was a great explanation, and I think let's kind of get into some of the more kind of technical material, and I'll jump to you next for the next question. So that's, I guess, why we should think about these things. Now, it's probably good to just get a basic, high-level, like, what is it to own Bitcoin, right? So maybe Lex, if you could answer for everyone, what is it to own some Bitcoin, and what's involved in kind of holding a seed and like holding those keys to be able to control our Bitcoin? What goes into that? If you could just give a high-level explanation for everyone.
Yeah, so ownership of Bitcoin is really knowledge and nothing more than that. It's if you know something that's equivalent of a number in a set of very large numbers, and that would be a number that's never been generated before and never will exist again in the universe, that's where your security comes from. It's the uniqueness of that number, and generation of that is, though the security of the generation of that number is the security of your Bitcoin. So that's usually represented in modern day with a set of 24 words or 12 words or something like that, because that's a lot easier for humans to deal with than, let's say, a 256-digit binary number. I think that's the correct way. I don't know if that's how an xpriv or xpriv is actually presented. But yeah, uniqueness of that number, having a way of storing it, that's what it means to own Bitcoin in the truest, almost abstract sense. And the ability to keep that secret that's what the main issue is with self-custody of Bitcoin. And if you were to share that with anyone else, you need to not only trust them not to spend your coins, but you need to trust them with the ability to keep the thing secret as well, and to understand how to do that. And yeah, I think
I think that's right. Yeah, Thierry, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that people think about Bitcoin as something digital, virtual, right? Something that is in the clouds. But I think that owning Bitcoin is much more physical act than just owning some login password in some website. It's literally you need to have like some sort of physical attachment to the numbers, to these very random numbers that that basically correspond to your own ability to move the Bitcoins in the future. So I think it's literally like you need to have much more easier than gold, much more cheaper than gold. You don't need to hire a proper army to protect your own gold. Bitcoin is much easier. You can even put in your memory. So I think it's pretty easy to protect your keys, but still it's more a physical act, in my opinion.
Right, so that's some great explanations, and let me just summarize some of that. I know some of this is a little bit technical, but it's kind of like when your parents told you you need to eat the vegetables. It's kind of like you need to learn a little bit of these basic concepts, so then later you know how to apply them in the real world. So let me just summarize some of those key ideas, right? So in Bitcoin, the idea is you are generating this secret, and really, when you're protecting your Bitcoin, it's like this massive, massive, massive number. And if anybody else gets that number, they'll steal your coins. So Bitcoin is about basically generating a sufficiently random number, as Lex and the guys were explaining. You are generating a very random number, and you are representing that number using the 12 or 24 words that you might have seen when you set up your Trezor, or your Ledger, or your Cold Card, or your Bitbox, or whatever hardware wallet, or whichever wallet you're using. So think of it like this. Your Bitcoins are not actually stored in your hardware wallet or in your phone. Really, it's like the ability to access or spend those coins is what you're actually protecting. So that 12 or 24 words is like the ability to spend those coins. And the way, yeah, go on.
Yeah, I mean, can we have answers and, the question answers after the panel?
We will do a Q&A at the end,
Okay.
yeah. So think of it like this. Your ability to spend those coins is kind of dictated by having those 24 words and a passphrase if you have one. Now, you can think of it like this. The Bitcoin network will look for you to have a valid signature. So when we send Bitcoins, if I want to send some Bitcoin to Giacomo, my client will basically compose a transaction, and then it will digitally sign that transaction using my private key. And so that's like that 24 words. Okay, but what the Bitcoin network does is it basically it can know that Stefan sent a valid signature, and that's what you're doing when you're signing a message. And so that's what you're using when you're using your phone wallet or using a hardware wallet to sign that message to spend the Bitcoins. So think of it like a lockbox to which Giacomo has the key or Lex has the key, and now anyone can send money into their lockbox if they give you an address to send into their lockbox, but I cannot take from his lockbox unless I know his key. So that's essentially what we're talking about here with security and self-custody. So just hopefully that helps explain some of the basic ideas that we're then going to talk about how to actually apply that in practice. Now, let's throw it back to you, Giacomo. So when people are first learning, I guess there are different ways people explain it. So, I mean, the way I normally teach it is I might say, look, start with a small amount on a phone wallet, and then slowly upgrade from there, learn how to get a hardware wallet, learn how to do multi-signature. How do you normally explain to people the high-level progression steps, and we'll get each of you guys to comment?
First, two very, very quick clarification. First, eat your vegetable. I think that's debatable. Don't trust verified this health advice. But anyway, the second is we are all talking about 24 words or 12 words. That's fine, and Stefan made a great job explaining that to beginners and intermediates. For the few of you who raise your hands when we said advanced, I have to add some complexity. It's not only about that secret number. That secret number is fine for a normal Bitcoin address or user, but now things are starting to get messier because, for example, Lightning Network, if you remember your secret number, your 12 or 24 words, that's not enough if you don't have a backup of the updated channel state. Then, multi-sig with a complex script. Already right now in a P2SH, if you forget the script and the pub keys of the other signers, it can become messy. With Taproot, with potentially large numbers of signers, when Taproot gets rolled out, you will have to remember the 12 words and the actual top script. So the explanation that we are giving right now is fine for the beginners and intermediate. Just don't listen to me right now. But the advanced people, you should think that you have to start thinking about how to secure not just that small information, which is easy, but also some more complex information around that. Then, about the progression Stefan was talking about. I think that the point is actually understand that your trade-off will be different. Everything in Bitcoin security is about trade-offs. If you hide the secret number too much, you will be safe from thieves, but you will just not access the number yourself because you have hidden it too well, or your heirs, or anybody else that you want to access it. If you don't hide it, if you just post it on Facebook, everybody, including you, will be able to access. So it's a trade-off. If you create a security model which is trivial, like a single SIG on a computer, then it's simple, but there is a failure mode. If you create a perfect security scheme, like 3 different kinds of hardware in multi-sig and stuff like that, that probably will cover all the security sweet spots, but you will forget about it. It will be too complex to maintain it. So you have to just use the right trade-off. And I think that starting with different amounts, as Stefan suggested, is the best way to explore trade-off. At the beginning, you just want to learn not to lose your private key. That's the most Bitcoin users, they don't get robbed. They actually shoot themselves in the foot because they just lose the access to the coin. So first, you probably concentrate in resilience. You focus on resilience and redundancy. Then you increase the amount, and you actually start to worry about strange kinds of external attacks. And that's probably a very nice way to progress.
Yeah. What is the actual question?
Yeah, so the question was just around if you could explain how the progression steps for somebody who's first learning to secure their keys versus getting to a more advanced level. What does it look like?
Yeah, the point is, people learn in different ways, but I think learning through practical means rather than theoretical means is 99% of the time better. Like, if you want to learn French, go to France and deal with people that don't speak English at all, and it will do more than, in a week you'll learn more than you would 10 years reading a textbook, right? So start with small amounts of money. Now is a great time because blocks are relatively empty. We've had years of it being very expensive to do any experimentation, doing Bitcoin transactions. And if it costs $20 every time you want to do a transaction, because if you're experimenting, you want them to clear in the next block, right? Which can mean putting a lot of money as a transaction fee. Right now, if you want to operate, late at night, depending on what part of the world you're in, generally after around 4 p.m., at least on Pacific time where I live, blocks pretty much clear out every night. And around 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Pacific time, they start to fill up again. So it's good to do some transactions. You're going to need to do a few of them just to see moving things from wallet to wallet. Back stuff up, delete wallets, recover them, see if you can get stuff back. And really just get these principles inside you, because this is ultimately what it comes down to with deep contingency planning, like the real questions people come to me and ask about, where what happens if I die? How do I make sure my kids can get my private keys? But doing that, how do I not compromise the security of the private keys while I'm still alive? What happens if I fall out with my son? He knows my private keys. Is he capable of keeping them secure even if I do trust him? Alluding to my point earlier that, even if you share this information with someone, not only do you have to trust them that they won't steal it, you have to trust that they can keep it secure as well, which is 2 separate things. It's difficult, but you really have to have these principles practiced and digested. And when it comes to complex contingency planning, no one is going to hold your hand through that, because no one wants to betray what they've done. If I can be riskily personal about what I do, it took me years to come up with a contingency plan for my Bitcoin. Years. And it involves multiple continents. It's complex. And I would never explain the nuance of what I've done, because it would compromise the security of it. So when it comes down to your planning and what you're going to do, even if you put a couple of $1,000s into Bitcoin, by 2030, that's going to be an insane amount of money. So you're going to need to treat it like, this is the thing, even when I tell people to set up new wallets, it doesn't matter if you're only using a small amount now. Everyone I gave $5 to back in 2012, 2013 is furious that they didn't treat it properly and lost their private keys or whatever, because it's tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars now. So you have to treat it with extreme amounts of paranoia and care. And once that's done, creating a contingency just needs to be done with a similar amount of paranoia. Like, I tell people, when you're writing down these 24 words, there's so many practices. Like, I tell people, close the curtains, because anyone could have a drone flying past your window with a camera on it. Make sure you don't accidentally pick your phone up. And even if you don't take a picture of the words, you're still exposing it to a camera. And it's the ultimate irony that this digital currency native to the internet, these words need to never touch anything digital, ever, apart from maybe the device that's generating it in the first place, which should be air-gapped and offline, ideally. Shout out to Coldcard. There's a lot that goes into it. And this should have rounded off back to the initial point, which I forget yet again, due to jet lag.
Progression steps, right?
Yeah, progression steps. So it comes down to practice. You need to, it's not about theory. You've got to feel it. When it comes down to these 24 words, there's got to be, when you get phished, if you're a noob user and you're plugging your Trezor into something and you go to instead of going to Trezor.io, you Google Trezor.io and you click on one of the advert links at the top of your Google results, which is a phishing website. I had a client of mine go to, it was gettrezor.com. They clicked on that instead, phishing website, and it said, oh, you need to type in your 24 words again. He didn't have that practice. I'm glad to say he took it like a champion, but he lost his entire stash from that. He didn't blame me for it, but nonetheless I felt hugely guilty. But he typed in his
Sorry,
24
for
words.
example, if you Google Bitcoin in Google, you end up on Bitcoin.com, which is not the phishing website, right?
Yeah, exactly. It sells you a fake version of Bitcoin called Bitcoin Cash. And this is the perfect example. All of the Bitcoin somethings are phishing attacks of a sort. Like, I consider them phishing, really. It's a little different. But the point is, you've got to feel it in your bones. When someone is asking you for those 24 words, you can't just go, oh, well, this is the password to my Trezor. You've got to feel it, like on a visceral level. You've got to know the importance and the relevance of those words. And to me, that only comes through practice. And I think most humans work that way. You do have these cerebral types who could just read a book and understand it all from theory, but I don't think that's realistic, really. I think you've got to see what happens with those 24 words, and we can get more into like passphrases, extra words, duress wallets. We can go further down, I hope, during this panel, but yeah, I'd say practice with empty blocks, move $1 back and forth from different wallets, different phone wallets, get a hardware wallet that's super cheap. Like, we're going to shill Jade a bit at this conference, I believe, and they're like the cheapest hardware wallet around. So I don't work for Blockstream, so I can happily shill them. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Okay, Tiara, do you want to add?
Yeah, I would concur to the point that I do think that it's not that you're making this very difficult. I think especially for beginning, I think compared to gold or like cash, like protecting your own banknotes bills, my opinion is much easier. But as you said, you literally need to try. It's much easier to do it practically than just hearing and theoretically think about. I guess the natural progression is like, okay, think about your own personal stash, your own personal saving account, and that's very easy. Basically, it's just one private key, right? I would just make it very, very easy as a concept. But I think that, as in, for example, you can have a joint bank account with your wife, for example. I think that the next progression, right? You can, for example, having a way to protect your own Bitcoin in a way that basically maybe you need another person to sign with you, and that could be either your own wife, if you want a joint Bitcoin wallet, or maybe if you want to think about your heirs, right? So if you want to protect in the future as an inheritance mechanism, I think Bitcoin natively allows you to do that much easier and compared to normal, like having some company is doing for you, like a notary or something. So I definitely think that if you just practice, you can go from your personal bank account, like single, and then go to, it's called multi-signature, meaning that you need multiple keys, right? They need to agree to move your Bitcoin. That for sure is much more secure, and of course you can make more schemes, more complex scheme, like to protect for other kind of things like inheritance. But that's another topic. I think that is very important to think about in the long term.
Yeah, great points there. And so summarizing some of that. So the typical progression steps, people might disagree on exactly, but typically people might start with a small amount on a phone wallet. An example might be Moon, MUUN.com. That's an example of a phone wallet you can just use to get started, maybe a few $100, something like that, and then maybe
The backup process is so unique on Moon,
Yeah,
though, that it doesn't really
yeah,
teach
right.
you much
If
about
you
general
want the
principles.
typical backup process, maybe Phoenix has like a 12-word backup, or Blue Wallet is probably another example. That's like a typical, easy starting phone wallet, and it's got the 12-word backup, which will be relatable for you because then when you go to use a hardware wallet, you'll have the typical 24-word backup, right? And Giacomo made a good point as well that once you get to more advanced setups using either Lightning or multi-signature, you also have to think about this thing called, okay, so it's like a wallet backup file, but really what's going in the background is like this thing called an output descriptor. So if you're interested to learn more about that, I did an episode with Andrew Chow. So if you search Stefan Livera, Andrew Chow, we spoke in detail about output descriptors. And so you can learn a little bit more in detail, but the short version to think about that is, think of it like those 24 words are like your keys, But in a multi-signature context, if you're using, say, a 2 or 3 or a 3 or 5 hardware wallet setup or whatever multi-signature setup, you can think of the output descriptor as sort of like a treasure map. And so if you don't have that little treasure map, it's like you have the keys, but you don't know where in the folder structure to go. You're searching for a needle in a haystack. So when you're getting to more advanced levels, you need to think about that wallet backup file. Now, some of the popular multi-signature wallets like Spectre, Sparrow, Electrum, and others, they have a backup file. So you download that backup file and you would keep that. But again, that's a bit more of an advanced conversation.
Can I jump in with that actually? If it's a question of priorities, generally smaller payments and generally everything's hot. So again, you're incentivized to not have large amounts sitting in Lightning nodes. So, and the backup process is more complicated. And so when it comes to priorities for your mental energy, learning about Bitcoin and backing up Bitcoin, it's, I'd say, simpler and usually dealing with much larger amounts. So that should be a priority. Lightning is definitely something that I struggle to understand. It's like quantum mechanics. Every time I try and explain it, I realize how I just don't understand it. Like, and it's ridiculous for how long I've been in the space. Lightning is just its own thing. Like, we've dealt with hard fork dumping. We know about blockchains. Like, when it comes to Lightning, it's not a blockchain. It's its own technology. So definitely don't make it a priority because it deals with small amounts and its backup process is totally different to Bitcoin.
Okay, so let's get a little bit more. We're trying to get our hands dirty here, right? You guys who maybe you've never self-custodied before, maybe you've just used a phone wallet, you've never used a hardware wallet before. Let's talk through that process. What does it look like to start your first hardware wallet and use it, and maybe give some tips on whether you should use the hardware manufacturer's software, web wallet, or should you be looking at learning how to use Spectre or Sparrow or Electrum?
So first of all, there is another trade-off here. Which hardware wallet to choose, for example. The concept of hardware wallet is to have a company, or usually there are exceptions, which will create a very specialized device. It's just a small computer, but it's a computer which is so small and so simple and so specialized in doing just one thing that it cannot be easily attacked from the outside. So the more specialized the hardware wallet it is, the harder it is for your neighbor to try to attack it and steal your private key. But on the other way around, the easier it is from the hardware company or a regulator subpoenaing the hardware company or any kind of supply chain attacker to actually target an attack. For example, you have Ledger Nano S. Ledger Nano S includes the secure elements, this chip, which your neighbor will never be able to attack with any kind of tool, any kind of equipment. But forcing the manufacturer of the chip, the ST Microelectronic company, which is an Italian-French company, to actually give to Ledger a specifically backdoor kind of chip is easier. On the other side, you have an old laptop with the Tails distribution on top with Electrum, and attacking these for your neighbor is very easy because laptops are full of security holes and side channels, so you will never be able to effectively protect it from your neighbor, but targeting it from a government will be more difficult. So you have a trade-off, and that's why most people use multi-sig, so you can actually make a multi-sig between different kind of hardware. That said, typically what you want to do with an hardware is basically made of 4 phases. The first one is you generate the keys. So the question is, do you trust the hardware producer with the randomness of generating the keys? If you don't, for example, Coldcard has a very cool ways to generate it through throwing dices. My favorite, we were discussing it before, it's using poker cards. But there are many ways to generate your randomness yourself instead of trusting the producer. The second phase is from the keys, you now have to generate the addresses to put your Bitcoins in. And this is very tricky because even if you didn't trust the hardware, now you have to put your keys in the hardware to generate the addresses, because you cannot generate your addresses by hand. You cannot just you can just select your private keys just throwing dices. So you don't need hardware. But then if you have your private keys and you need your addresses, you cannot do that on paper unless you are like SIPA or somebody. So now you have to trust the hardware to put your keys in to generate the addresses. Now you have to just store the keys for a long time. And now even just paper and pen could be okay. In some circumstances, having a redundant copy on paper, of course, is not very resilient to fire and something like that, but just keeping a paper wallet for a long time is fine. And now you have to access again your keys. So I think that the point is that you have to think about everything you're doing in a separate way and how much you're trusting the hardware producer. As Stefan suggested, one thing that you should not trust your hardware producer with is the software tool. So if you're buying Ledger or Trezor, then my suggestion would be don't use Ledger Live or Trezor Suite, because in that way you're trusting the producer both for actual hardware surface attack surface and for any kind of privacy leak on the software level. For example, I think that Ledger Nano S is great, but if you connect with trivial Ledger Live website, then you're basically giving the connection of all your public keys together with your IP address, ClearNet IP address, so basically your name, because from the IP address to your physical identity is just one phone call away. So you're giving some company, which is a good company that maybe they don't want your data, but if they have it, they may be forced by somebody else to keep it. So you're giving them all your public keys, all your addresses, plus your identity. Don't do that. So maybe use, we were discussing before, and maybe we would give some example, use a Sparrow connected with your own Electron server or some trusted Electron server, so you also protect your privacy. The point is that you have to understand is that you can use almost any kind of hardware wallet device with a large number of different software wallets. So you don't have to use the Trezor with the Trezor Suite or the Ledger with the Ledger Live, or you can use your different firms of hardware with a different stack of software tools. I know that Ledger and Trezor did provide some kind of alternative that connects to your own full node, which is better, but the default option is usually very, very bad for your privacy. And secure privacy is just a delayed form of security. If you are not private, you are just giving more information to your attacker to eventually break your security model.
Okay. Anything to add, Lex?
Yeah, I think the zoom in way out, and part of the talk I'm going to give tomorrow is about this topic, which is you have to be able to tie your own shoelaces, and it's hopefully like an ass kicking, but at the same time motivating to talk about this stuff to anyone that hasn't dealt with self-custody yet. If someone is tying your shoelaces for you, it weakens you in the pure, like, being Ayn Rand ideological about the whole thing. You have to become self-reliant in this space, and it applies to the whole digital realm, which I'm going to get into tomorrow. But when it comes to Bitcoin, it's particularly obvious here. We have that mantra of not your keys, not your coins, and what it means to own them needs to be digested and understood. So when it comes to best practices, there's a whole bunch of corners that can be cut, but I really encourage people never to go down the process. Even though it's a learning curve, I still think there's only one way to do it. And I'm going to get more specific in a second, but my general outlook on Bitcoin, which is not shared by most Bitcoiners, is that I like adversity, specifically hostility from the state. Because when we have Bitcoin-friendly environments, for example, I'm sorry, Tom, if this is going into murky territory, man. But when we have, in the USA, it's a very friendly environment for Bitcoin. And what that results in is us having to hammer home best practices that people are just not going to adopt. To use this stupid analogy, if every morning you could just hold your foot up and your servant puts your shoe on and ties your laces for you, you're never going to learn how to do it. And that's the environment in which most people hold Bitcoin in America, because they will buy things like GBTC, which is not proper ownership. They will never bother with self-custody. And running a node, all of these things that are essential are just not being done because it's not necessary. And it means we have to come up with all these mantras and constantly say to people, not your keys, not your coins, and run a node. Why? Is it essential? And you have the Peter McCormacks, people saying, oh, it's too difficult and all this. That's not the right approach, and unfortunately you can get away with it. So what I like to encourage people to do is use the hardware wallets and the software wallets that don't allow you to cut the corners. So there's Trezor and there's Ledger and all that stuff, and they offer things that might be a stepping stone to doing what you need to do. And sure enough, for me, they actually were. But I can't recommend people do it. You can't use the Trezor suite. You just can't. And this is the thing. The hardware wallet I suggest to all of the people I teach, and they're always brand new Bitcoiners, is Coldcard. And it's a nightmare because Coldcard is difficult to use because Bitcoin is not straightforward. It's not hard, but it's totally unlike anything most people have ever done. There's no understanding of the principles of public key cryptography taught in school or anything like that. It's all brand new to people. It's not hard, but it's new. And it has to be learned. So when it comes to, I'd say, get a Coldcard. Coldcard doesn't have a software wallet that it connects to. It doesn't. You have to go out there and find your own software wallet. It can be Electrum, it can be Wasabi, it can be Spectre. And again, I recommend Spectre to people, and when people run Spectre, guess what? Spectre doesn't work unless you have a full node behind it. It doesn't have an SPV mode, because SPV sucks and we don't want people using it. So it doesn't let you cut that corner either. So if you're using Coldcard and you're connecting it to Spectre wallet, there's just no option. I'm not telling people, oh, it's a good thing to run a node. Why should I run a node? How much is it going to cost? Well, you have to set this up and that. It's just no option. You have to run a node. You can't be dependent on leaky software wallets like the Trezor suite, which is going to expose everything you do. You just have to use it properly from the off. And I agree, it's not easy, but at the same time, it's worthwhile, and it's maybe not something that is. Are we still on the question of working up towards stuff, or just the process?
In practice, what does it look like using a hardware wallet, right?
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of things that come with it, and I've been through this process a million times.
Yeah.
So, there's no perfect security. So when you order your Coldcard, if it takes us, there's all these sorts of. I tell people, if you have any reason or any intuition that something happened to this package on the way to your house, don't ignore it. Pay attention to it. If there's some sort of mark on the box or something like that, it might be irrational, but if you just don't have a good feeling about it, don't ignore that feeling. Because paranoia is the name of the game with this stuff. You're making a bank. You're making a bank. You're not. So this thing arrives. You've got to check the firmware that's on it. You have to learn how to do that.
I think we'll jump to Q&A, just to give everyone some time to ask a few questions. Let me just quickly summarize a few points, just so everyone can follow along, and maybe, Chiro, you can take some of the first few questions to come. But let me just quickly summarize this, because I think we've thrown a lot out at you guys, and some of you might not be following along everything. So just think of it like this. Your wallet manages the keys in the background for you. So there'll be multiple keys and addresses, and you have, think of it like there's three pieces to this puzzle. You might have the hardware wallets and the keys. You might have the software wallet that's coordinating the transaction for you, and that could be Spectre or Sparrow or Wasabi or Electrum. And then you might have the node that it's calling out to. So think of it like there's three pieces to that puzzle. And so you might have one hardware wallet, or you might have multiple. But the idea is your Sparrow or your Spectre or your Wasabi is calling out to a particular node to ask the question, hey, do I have any coins? And to send that transaction. So just think of it like you've got those three pieces. And what we were talking about here is kind of a meshing of some of those three different pieces, and they can operate in different ways and connect in different ways. But if I could just kind of summarize very quickly for you, you might start with a phone wallet, and then maybe you might get a hardware wallet and connect that with, say, Sparrow wallet as an example, which has easy defaults, and then later you can upgrade to learning how to run your own Bitcoin node that's underlying that Sparrow wallet, just as an example, just to give you some actionable steps for that. So let's throw it open for questions now. So who's got a question, and I'll come around, and the guys on the panel can answer for you.
Heard rumors that if you exposed your extended public key, you're compromising your private keys. How true is that?
Okay, I think, I don't know how much technical you want to deep on this, but technically, yes, you should be careful about your extended public key, which is basically, I won't call it a view key. It's like a way to give to others to watch all of your addresses and basically to access all your balances. So in some aspect, if you leak you have multiple addresses from that specific keys, private keys, and if you leak one private key, it could happen if it's not done in the right way that you could leak all the other keys. But I think that this is a very I don't think any wallets anymore is doing like an alternate kind of derivation.
Because all the portfolio trackers now require, especially the UTXOs, they require the extended public key to be entered. So that, I'm always hesitant to enter that.
Yeah, so I would like, I guess, I would probably hesitate to use those portfolio trackers where you're putting in an XPub, and I'd prefer to use Sparrow or Spectre or my own thing to just calculate how many coins I have and then calculate it myself, so that way I'm not giving that information to somebody else. Because remember, when you give that XPub, they know all of your coins. And there could be an incentive later if they get hacked, or there could even be an incentive if they're malicious to sell that information. And then they would know, oh hey, this guy's IP and he's a whale, he's got all these coins. That's obviously a security aspect there.
Yeah, your concern is privacy, but it's not. There is categorically no way to work backwards from a public key to a private key.
Yeah.
It's your concern here is that you're ruining your security of your operations, but they can't actually spend your Bitcoin. Not unless we want to start talking about.
There is no way to actually guess for the computing power
No.
that's available today.
Yeah, exactly. Just to clarify, from the public key, you cannot reverse engineer the private key unless there is a huge bug in the software implementation. Back in the days, there was an Android wallet that had some problems in the implementation, and so from repeated signatures you could guess. But nowadays, the way it's constructed makes it realistically impossible to just reverse engineer the private key. The problem is just privacy, but privacy is not disconnected from security. Think about I want to give you a stupid example. Think about all the movies where there is like the bank heist or the high security facility heist like Mission Impossible or Ocean's 11. The only way they can plan the heist is knowing any details of the security model of the target. Or money heist, you have to know actually how the place is done in order to send Tom Cruise inside the tunnel. If you don't know that, you cannot attack. So the privacy of your public keys, it is like that. They can attack you physically or with the social attack or phishing or whatever to actually access your private keys, not from cryptography, but from social vectors or physical vectors. But if they don't know how much money you have and where, then attacking you becomes super difficult. It's just like guessing. They need to know you to attack you.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Giacomo. Guys, let's get some more questions. Anyone else? Questions?
Hi. Would you recommend having?
Hold on, close up.
Oh, sorry. Would you recommend having a KYC stack and a non-KYC stack, or only non-KYC stack? And what's your thoughts about this? So just think of like scenario in the future, you might want to buy like a big house or something else.
I would recommend having a non-KYC stack. Fundamentally.
What's your thought about it?
Non-KYC is it's fantastic because KYC on the back of my shirt it says KYC is the illicit activity. We've seen the ramifications of. I mean, we potentially just saw JSTAR murdered because of this exact issue. What you own paints a massive target on your back if you don't publicly display the fact that you have a lot of Bitcoin, and you're required to in order to. Again, this is one of the reasons that the friendliness of the state compromises the manner in which people use Bitcoin. Because if it was not possible to use Coinbase and all these, I mean, I'm going to sort of jump around a bit here. Like, I like it when I'm explaining Bitcoin to people and all the principles it allows for, the freedom and all that stuff. I always say that the exchanges are like, imagine there's a land of the free, like a real, total libertarian and ANCAP paradise. But to get there, you've got to go to an airport, and you're going to need a passport, and you're going to need to completely bend over and just, like sacrifice a lot of personal dignity and liberty. That's what the exchanges are like to get into the land of the free with Bitcoin. And of course, a lot of people just leave their Bitcoin on the exchanges anyway, so they never even get the advantage. But you have to sacrifice this incredibly important information if you're buying Bitcoin the way most people buy it. You can clean it after the fact, and that's good, but some services like BlockFi will penalize you for that. They will close accounts if they see that your coins are coming from CoinJoin transactions, which are made for the purpose of stripping KYC out. So, yes, I totally would recommend having KYC-free Bitcoin. That could be the only Bitcoin you have. Mining is a great way of acquiring it too. KYC-free should be the default, even if it's not the majority. And when you spend Bitcoin, supposing you have 1,000 Bitcoins and you want to spend one of them, make the effort to clean the coins you're spending on your day-to-day basis, to make the effort for those to be clean, for obvious reasons. Though I don't know how much more detailed I want to get here, given the
No.
precariousness of.
Just a nuance, just a possible caveat. I think that, so that's the default. I think that non-KYC should be the default. I think that it may make sense, especially for some people, not all, to have a plausible deniability KYC stack. Like, I mean, I really lost all my bitcoins in a boating accident, really. But maybe I have one, right? So it makes sense for plausible deniability. That said, I don't think it makes sense to buy a house. Because the point there is that when you have privacy, you can always, when you need it, selectively disclose. Not the other way around. So when you lose privacy, there is no way you can get it back. But when you keep it, you can give it away when you want for the purpose you want. So, for example, you have some bitcoins, non-KYC, completely private, nobody can attack you like Tom Cruise style, knowing what you have. But when you need to buy a house, then you can, for example, use your wallet. You can go through a CoinJoin round. If you keep your wallet information, you can still prove which one your inputs were and which one your outputs were. The other parties cannot, but you can if you need it. So I will just keep it the hard way, except for some small plausible deniability stuff. I will just keep it all private, and then if you have serious problem, for example, selling, then you can selectively disclose. You can just hire a technical assistant on any kind of audit, legal audit, and you can say, okay, you want to see where this is coming from, I can show you selectively. So you always have the option to go back. It's the idea that in order to get accepted by your exchange or your lending platform, you have to give away your privacy for everybody is nuts. You have to keep it, and eventually, if this compromise is what makes it for you, then you can selectively disclose.
Excellent. So, any more questions, guys? Who has? You haven't had a chance. Let me get you first. Okay.
My question is about, I guess, the $5 reg tax. So, at some point, hopefully, when we reach the promised land where we have a lot of people with Bitcoin, a $5 reg tax seems like a scary thought, whereby I can easily steal someone's money. Nowadays, if someone steals your money, the bank can reverse it. Any thoughts around that issue?
Yeah, I definitely think that what Giacomo said, so privacy is security. So first, don't disclose to when you can, that you hold Bitcoin. But of course, if something happens, to know, I think that would be better to have like different kind of setups. So you have like a small stash that if something happens, you can at least like having a way to just say, okay, I have it, I have it. So just take, this is all what I have. But of course, if everything is doxed, I mean, everything of your stash is known, and this is why privacy is very important. I think that solution has a multi-signature where you require external people to confirm a transaction that can help you. So a service like a 2-second factor authentication kind of, but enforced by the blockchain, by a contract on the blockchain, like in Bitcoin you can do it. I think those kind of things is the next step.
Maybe also standardization, because the problem with privacy is great because, as we said, if they don't know you, they cannot attack you. But once you get attacked, privacy may backfire because, for example, you give away a plausible deniability wallet, and the guy with the wrench keeps going like, no, okay, fine, now give me another one, and he keeps going. So in that case, privacy is not great because he doesn't know when to stop hitting you. So I think that eventually this will be solved by standardization. For example, when you have trucks transporting values, they have these signs like, don't even try to rob us because we cannot open it. Or you go in a jewelry and the guy with a sign, this safe, use the standard stuff so that the clerk cannot open it, don't try to kill him because he cannot. If you just put a sign in your home, don't torture me because it's all in a time lock, they will just probably not believe you. But eventually, I think that what will happen will be standardization. So the attacker so we will use best practices so much that the attacker will know that you may be using, and he will believe that you may be using best practices. So an expendable plausible deniability wallet is still good because the attacker can go away risk of the attack, so he will not be angry and he will not go on board. But the best thing would be when when your security is not just great but also believable, so it will stop wrenching you. That's safe. If you don't expose yourself and you just keep a low profile like we are doing, then you're safe.
Yeah, and I think some of these things will be, as multi-signature becomes popularized, then less criminals might even try it because they know multi-sig is popular. So I think we have time for one more question. So do you want to go back to you?
In your opinion, which is the best implementation of multisig on the hardware wallets? Because I've tried Ledger and it's not very good.
Well, multi-signature would typically require multiple hardware wallets. You'd use like a combination of a ledger and a cold card or something like that.
So 2 different ones.
Yeah, and that's the way of minimizing the supply chain attack he was talking about earlier. Supposing Ledger literally is totally compromised and you get shipped something which makes predictable private keys. If you use a cold card as well and your addresses come from a combination of the two mnemonics, then you're still secure.
I would say that's the main point for a multi-sig for an individual person. So if you are, like Thierry was saying, an organization and you have a joint account with your wife or then, okay, multi-sig can be used for that. But if multi-sig is used by a single person, I would say the main point is to actually explore different trade-offs from an old laptop and the Ledger Nano S and the cold card. You distribute the attack surface across different solutions, and then you can have an advantage. So, okay, there is another reason to multi-sig for one person, which is you have to be. You basically have, you never have a single point of failure for the signature. So you go to your home in Canada and sign one, then you go to Tanzania and sign the second with PSBT, but nobody's doing that. So I think the point is to explore trade-offs in different hardware. So I would say multi-sig across different hardware. The point is which is the best software to do that, which is that's a debatable point. There are we have Spectre, we have Sparrow, we have Electrum.
What do you think is the best?
I'm going to say Spectre. I have good experience with it, and we were just discussing earlier, they have really high integrity as an organization. They had a potential virus in one of the Windows binaries that they released. It turned out to be a false alarm, but the fact that they disclosed it so as to minimize harm to anyone, and they didn't try and sweep it under the rug, that shows it's one of those situations where you make a mistake and you handle it in a way that demonstrates such integrity that it's almost better for your reputation that something went wrong and you demonstrated how you deal with it than if nothing went wrong. So I'm very impressed with the Spectre team, and the whole thing was designed with multi-sig in mind, but there are multiple good things out
I'm
there.
warming up and Sparrow as a best solution right now, but actually I will also mention Electrum as a standard. Electrum is like a global software which is right now it does everything. So it's never the best at anything anymore, but it's very standard. You will always be able to access your old Electrum keys. I mean it's not it's never idiosyncratic. Your Electrum keys are always super standard. So don't just forget Electrum, which is a very good old alternative. Sorry, Thierry.
No, I think you did right. So I think again, it's a personal choice. When the keys are you own your own keys, it's just a personal choice of usability, right, or user experience of that particular. Because in the end, the software is just a controller, right, of your own hardware wallet. So Electrum, myself, I like Electrum because, as Giacomo said, it's literally just standard. But maybe it's not that fancy, it's not that maybe new kind of user interface, but still, it's very standard. It does the things very good, and it's a good track record. It's the oldest wallet around, so I think that would be a safe choice for now and even for the future.
Very quick, since I see Samsung staring at me. A multi-sig is not necessarily between you and yourself with a different hardware, but it could also be with the company providing two-factor authentication or limits in spending. So, for example, if you use Green software, then you can use your hardware wallets for your part, which can be a 2 of 2 or a 2 of 3. So you may have two hardwares in order to store your keys, and then you can have a third party co-signing only if you stay behind some limits, below some limits, or only if you provide factor authentication solution. So that's another kind of multi-sig in which you don't do it with yourself, but you just share the responsibility with the specialized companies.
do you think that these CASA solutions, things like that, because it means betraying your whole UTXO set really to a third party? Like even if they only have one of the keys and it's like 3 of 5 I've got to sign or something, I just don't want CASA to know my whole Bitcoin dealings. I don't want Unchained Capital, any of these companies that provide custody solutions. Like it seems like too big of a compromise to me. Maybe you guys can.
No, I fundamentally agree. At least, for example, when Green started to actually take this problem seriously of XPub, they made Tor default just like other wallets. So at least when you share sharing your XPubs in a way that can just match your UTXOs is dangerous. But please don't add to that sharing your IP. So until your IP is safe, so you're connecting Tor only, then even some internal connection between your addresses may be not that dangerous. But that's true also for if you use Electrum default, that will connect. So yeah, we said Electrum, but when you start Electrum, by default it will connect in ClearNet to an external random server. That's very dangerous because that means that somebody else, you don't know who, will have all your addresses connected with your personal IP, which is basically your name again. So at least Tor as default should be the way to go.
I might just add, so yeah, Electrum is like an OG wallet, it's been around, just as Giacomo was saying, just it's known that there are these public servers that are basically run by chain surveillance companies, and there's a good chance that when you just open on default settings, it will connect to those.
So I got a gold card and
What?
So yeah, I wanted to feel better about my security, so I use multiple hardware wallets, and I got a gold card recently and had the fun time to learn how to use it. I downloaded Electrum, and then I set it up, used the passphrase, but I wasn't aware of any servers that I connected to, so I just connected to a default server.
Yeah.
So it's not the greatest.
Yeah, so,
Yeah,
so we do need to move on quickly. So let me just quickly answer your question. So the short answer is yes, Electrum on default settings is doxing your balance and your transactions out to the public servers. The quick way, if you are interested, I like Sparrow and Spectre basically nowadays because Sparrow has good defaults in that it uses Tor over default and Tor is already packaged in. So that's a good example, and it will use certain trusted or kind of semi-trusted servers as an example, Blockstream, I think MZ, Luke Charles, and a few others. And then what you can do is graduate up to using your own server, your own Electrum server. And Spectre has a default way where you can run your own Bitcoin node. So that's also not calling out to somebody else's server, you're using your own server. So that's why Sparrow and Spectre are kind of very easy defaults that I normally just recommend for people. And I think Sparrow and Spectre are basically like neck and neck in my mind. I think Sparrow is probably at the top personally right now, but it's kind of, they're always innovating against each other. Now I think that's basically all we've got time for. So we're going to move on to the next panel, but you guys can find us just around if you've got questions, we're happy to help you. So I'll hand it back to Tone, and thanks everyone.